Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing well. And you?
Well, thanks for asking. I'm doing just fine. Well, first, I'd like to thank all the listeners for tuning in to our program. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will be talking about astrology and Kriya Yoga. But before we begin, I would like to take a moment just to review the description of our show today. You have written, Swami, about our program today. The best way to predict your future is to create it. What surrounds us is within us, and as above, so below. Life is a simple mind game. Come and see some of the revolutionary ideas that Institute for Personal Development is employing to win the game. See how they use the biosphere of energy available at any moment to keep their lives on course. In the same way ancient mariners used the stars to cross the oceans and modern space travelers explore other worlds, the Kriya Yogi transcends the limits of physical reality. Whether you are crossing an ocean or launching into outer space, the single most important ingredient is the vehicle. In Kriya Yoga, the physical body is the means. The shape, condition, composition, and alignment of the physical body are the tangible guidelines for inner space travel. Navigation is right up there in importance, not just doing, but knowing and doing. Learn how to use the birth chart in your voyage to the divine. Well, Swami, that sounds like a pretty expansive topic. Where would you like to begin?
Well, I think the whole thing of using astrology with regard to your spiritual practice, I think that the concept of a concealed deity, is at the heart and the meeting point of all religions, sciences, astrology, and yoga. The whole concept of union of the individual with the divine. And, just like going hiking, you don't go hiking without a compass. You don't go hiking without taking provisions for how long you're going to be gone. And so the same thing with this inner spiritual journey that we embark on, that, you're going to need, first of all, like we said, your vehicle, your mind-body complex is of the utmost importance. And that's where I really think the yoga part is important, because you're employing strategies to affect changes. And like we said in the description, it affects the shape, the composition, the condition of your physical body, how the segments of your body line up, the range of motion we have at the articulations. These are all important variables. And then, of course, the concept of navigation. That yoga is instruction to do something. This union of the individual with the divine. So in order to, just plot out your course, the birth chart can be an incredible tool. That the concept of astrology, that nature expresses invisible energies through visible forms. That the discoveries that we've had with quantum physics, that underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void. That the concept of the electron, it's both a particle and it's a wave. But the interesting thing about it is that it's a particle when it's being observed. That observation has effect on reality. And when you really think about, science began with the observation of nature. And so astrology really is kind of like the mother of all sciences. But the interesting thing about it is that it's not only a science in that, we take into consideration the physical forms, that the astrologers figured out where the planets were and where they're going to be, but also the association between the movement of those celestial bodies and the effects that it had on the planet. It's their relationship to these invisible forces. So astrology isn't just an empirical science, but it also has, the benefits of what we call a symbolic language. So that it kind of gives us clues into things, the association between, what is around us and how it's going to affect us internally. Because when you're on a spiritual journey, this information is of the utmost importance.
You had mentioned earlier about the birth chart, and I have actually heard you say before you have referred to it as a CPS, the Celestial Positioning System. Can you inform our listeners about the importance of the birth chart and how we can use that to further our growth?
Well, the birth chart, your natal chart, is a map of the universe at the time of your birth with you at the center. So it becomes a jumping off point. It's the starting point. The birth chart, from our perspective, is a map of your karmic pattern. It gives you clues into strengths, challenges that you bring into this lifetime. But then it also becomes, like we start to say, it's a starting point. It's like this is where the clock begins. And then using the birth chart, we can mark out what was called points of passage. And then, of course, if you have a metaphysical or a mystical system, then, of course, you're employing rites of passage, so that you're not just chronologically aging, but there's this whole psychological and spiritual aspect to human development that you are initiating. And having the element of timing using your birth chart is really helpful.
So once we understand the birth chart, how can we use the information to explore what are some of the things that we need to work on in our everyday life as we are experiencing it right now?
Yeah, the whole thing of utilizing the biosphere of energy at a given moment. It's kind of like, I liken it to the concept of sailing. That when you're trying to take a boat and pass it, over the ocean and bring it to a certain point, you break it down into all of the different variables that you're dealing with. One of the biggest things in sailing would be the direction of the wind that's being blown. Because, it's one thing when the wind is pulling your boat in the direction that you want it to go. The other thing is that if the wind is blowing in a different direction than you want it to go, now you have to use your navigational skills in how to keep the boat on course. And in order to do that, you have to have your point of destination in view, and then also utilizing the forces that are available to you at a given time. You're trying to utilize that energy to keep the boat going in that direction. So in sailing, the term would be something like tacking, where even though the wind is blowing in the opposite direction of where you want it to go, you're able to utilize that energy and actually go against the wind, using angles and, different geometry and physics. And the same is true with the human being. When you have the benefit of a metaphysical or a mystical system, and you have developed yourself, and you have awareness that the human being is dealing with influences that some of them are tangible, some of them are invisible, and some of the influences are invisible and intangible. And so again, the birth chart can give us some insight into not only the positioning of the tangible influences, but also insight into these invisible and intangible influences that we'll be dealing with. Because again, coming back to yoga, the union of the individual with the divine, that you are actually trying to do something. And like we have been saying, you're trying to separate from one source of sustenance and reconnect to a different source of sustenance. And to have the benefit of, like what you said, this celestial positioning system, you're able to pinpoint your target. And once you can zero in on your target, then it makes the goal more attainable. Because it isn't just, let's put the boat in the water and see where it goes. It's not, let's just get in the car and go for a ride. It's in Kriya Yoga, we have a very specific goal that we want to literally, point the desires of our body to a particular source of sustenance. Recognizing that we are codependent, that we have needs. But it's not until we have this desire for this energy field that is invisible and intangible, do we start to get the benefits that come with that relationship.
So this definitely sounds a lot more intense than just looking at your daily horoscope. So I know people think that that's astrology. What is the big difference between that and what you're talking about?
Well, again, everything has varying degrees of understanding. It's like, even say, for example, I'm what they call a steam fitter by trade. I'm a, pipe fitter by trade, and welding is a tool of the trade. Now, there are some people that are welders, and some people even think that welding in and of itself is a trade. But from the perspective of a steam fitter, welding is a tool of the trade. It's something that we use in the context of performing a task, of taking, pieces of pipe and putting them together. Now, the same is true with the concept of astrology. Again, astrology is a tool that was utilized in spiritual communities. And it was designed to, to help human beings plot out this developmental process. Now, what we try and do now is just like what we've done with our religions, we've specialized them. Now, all of a sudden, you become an astrologer, as opposed to utilizing it as a tool for something to do. It becomes a craft in and of itself. And, before astrology became property of newspapers and magazines and a lot of, oversimplified sun-centered astrology, it was a tool that people would use in order to help them grow psychologically and spiritually. Does that answer your question? Or?
It does. So you're saying that by studying the planets and the stars, they really used it in their everyday lives. It wasn't just to create a future for them. They actually used it for everyday purposes.
Yeah, I mean, just look at how much of astrology we use today, with regard to, just setting up, our day and setting up, our calendar. And, it's how much of it, sets up the seasons of the year. And then that's just using, the sun, the moon, and the earth. Whereas now you start to incorporate the other planets. Now all you're doing is you're giving yourself additional information. Because the human being is way more complex than just a physical body. And that's a big part of, what we talk about. It's this interplay between the physical, the mental, and the spiritual is oftentimes where a lot of our collisions are taking place. And a lot of it, there's really no such thing as bad energy. It's just energy that isn't being used properly. And so a lot of the insight that you can get with your, I want to say, astrological insights can be very helpful if you have a metaphysical or a mystical system. If you have the ability to control how you think, then you have the vehicle, then you have the equipment. Again, it's like, coming back to sailing. You don't need a weatherman to tell you which way the wind is blowing. But if you do not know how to sail, then your vehicle is going to be at the mercy of the wind.
All right, I'm going to have you hold that thought for right now. What we'd like to do is just take a little bit of a break and hear a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachat.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Well, welcome back, listeners. Thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. My name is Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda. And Swami, during the break, I actually had a question regarding astrology and so forth. Is there a connection between mythology and astrology?
Well, to answer your question, mythology, astrology, the parables of religion, and the symbolism of fairy tale were symbolic languages. Because when we are trying to navigate through the realms of waves, and we're trying to get ourselves to, the part of reality that was called non-locality in quantum physics, this indivisible unified state, that we're going through force fields, we're going through energy systems. And mythology and astrology and the parables of religions and the symbolism of fairy tale were languages that we could try and give tangibility, to these invisible energies. So they were what was called symbolic languages, so that it would help us navigate through these different force fields and energy systems, these different bodies that the human being has. And, you know, in order to be successful in it, you really need the instruction that it's kind of like being spiritual is you're going from physical to astral mental to causal spiritual awareness. It's like driving a car, driving a boat, and flying a plane. And even though there are things about each of those activities that are similar, you know, there are also things about each one of them that is going to be very different and unique. So as we go from physical awareness to astral mental awareness to causal spiritual awareness, we're working with different force fields and energy systems, and so the rules will change. And again, you know, having a symbolic language gives you a template that you can actually work with. And, you know, I mean, the way I see it today, it's we have a tendency to oversimplify things, you know, to the extent where, you know, like we'll have, you know, somebody will give a statement like, if you can drive a car, you can fly a plane. Well, you know, that could be 100% true for all of the people that can fly planes. But with regard to the people that just know how to drive a car, and those people that either have never been in a plane or have only been a passenger in a plane, could find themselves in a plane with not, you know, the ability to actually fly that plane. And, you know, depending on the type of individual you are, I mean, you might be the kind of person that won't even get this thing off the ground. Or you could even be the person who is smart enough to get it off the ground, but now to land it is going to be a whole different other story. And these are some of the pitfalls that we come into, you know, with regard to this spiritual journey. You know, that if you actually, you know, say, for example, if all you have is the ability to drive a car and you find yourself flying a plane, you could actually put yourself in a pretty dangerous position. And those are some of the warnings that we have in these spiritual communities. You know, that you want to really be able to plot your course. You know, and you want to be able to, you know, transfer your skills, but also educate yourself. And that's a big part of, you know, I think what we do with Kriya Yoga.
These all sound like some really fascinating, revolutionary ideas, Swami. We have some questions that I think we should need to have you answer for us. And one of them is, we talk about using the physical body as the vehicle. Where do you suggest an initiate should start with that?
Well, in Kriya Yoga, we start with what we call the asana program. You know, but again, coming back to yoga, I mean, you start with yama, you start with niyama, you start with asana, you start with pranayama. You know, that you're going to need your path of action, skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise. You know, then your next phase in that is your path of knowledge, you know, your niyamas, you know, sacred study. That you have to understand that in order to navigate through these different dimensions of our makeup, through the different bodies and energy fields, that you have to understand the laws that are at work. And then, you know, of course, you know, your path of devotion. You know, this sense of connectedness to the void or the nothing, which becomes the power source to make it all happen. So again, where do you begin? You know, I mean, it's all going to depend on what your goals and objectives are. If total consciousness is your goal, then I would say start with yama, niyama, then asana, pranayama. You know, because you're going to need it all.
Let's talk a minute about some of the tools that we've talked about previously. We've discussed the labyrinth earlier. Now we've also discussed the birth charts. Is that something that you have a service that's available to people?
Well, to answer your question, you know, we do birth charts, primarily, you know, mostly for our students. You know, like I said, we think it's really helpful that you have a metaphysical or a mystical system, you know, as opposed to just doing birth charts independent. And as far as the labyrinth, I don't know that we've ever discussed that, you know, as far as on this show yet. But the labyrinth is an ancient tool that we use. We use the Cretan labyrinth as an exercise in concentration. And it comes out of the two-part Greek philosophy. You know thyself, nothing in excess. And we use the chakra system as part A of know thyself. And then the labyrinth itself is an organized way of distributing energy into all of the different departments of your life based on the time scales of your different bodies. You know, so as you go from your lower energy centers to your higher energy centers, you're actually going from physical awareness to astral mental awareness to causal spiritual awareness. And just like we were saying, those dimensions are on different time scales. So that what may be a year in the physical is maybe a month in the astral mental, which is only a millisecond in the spiritual.
Well, we do need to be wrapping up this program in just another minute or two. Is there any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners? Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in today. We are talking consciousness. This is the Voice of Yoga, and my name is Lisa Winton, and with me is Swami Jayananda. Well, thank you, Swami, so much for your time today.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. Do you have any final questions or concerns or curiosities, you know, as we approach the close of the show?
Well, thank you so much today, listeners, and we wish you a Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.
Namaste.
Mm-hmm.